Don't make these 10 retirement planning mistakes. Hey, stop letting go of control and losing the potential of your money and your life. And don't be like 95% of Americans that are not financially independent at age 65. It's not because of a lack of effort. It's a faulty model. Let's talk about that briefly. Some of the retirement planning problems are they're one-dimensional. People put their money in IRAs, 401ks, those types of retirement plans. It's very one-dimensional. It's deferring their taxes, and there's not a lot of opportunity if there's economic downturns or if there's high tax rates or just simply if there's high inflation. We all know about compound interest, but what about compounding costs? If there's hidden fees, non-performing fees, commissions, that can have a huge impact on your accounts over time. One of the other issues is no distribution diversification. What does that mean? If you just have that one account and you're stuck one-dimensionally and you still have to pay tax on every dollar that comes out, what if taxes go up and you don't have a different way to get to money? Or what if interest rates fluctuate and you're not getting the same amount of income? One simple trick can help you increase your cash flow 33% in retirement. Another issue is people delay their Social Security, and there's an opportunity cost to that. I see so many people out there say, wait till you're 70 and you get a higher payout. But what happens if you die early? What happens over the 8 years that you aren't taking money and what you could do to earn interest with that money or enjoy that money? Another issue is kind of the mindset that comes with retirement. First off, most people are kind of sacrificing and waiting to enjoy life till one day, someday. They often budget to put money into these plans without plugging leaks or creating more cash flow. One of the things that really infuriates me is needs-based planning instead of maximization. Sometimes people ask you, how much do you want to have in retirement? And they'll even try to convince you can live off 70% of your pre-retirement income because maybe you don't have loans and you don't have certain expenses. But the thing is, now you have every day off to buy stuff on Amazon. All right, kind of joking there. But the other issue is just inflation alone. You have to have more money in the future just to buy the same number of things you have today. And this needs-based says, here's a target that you want to get to, how much you have to save based upon the interest rate you can earn, as if we could predict those things or control those things. So I want to help people learn about the maximization theory. Another issue is bad sequencing. People are funding these plans at the expense of building up safety and liquidity. They're building up these plans rather than hiring a good financial team. They're building up these plans rather than paying off really high interest rates that could be costing them tons of money. Another issue is what I would call premature diversification. Diversification is a great preservation strategy as we start to build a lot of wealth, but it can slow things down on the way up because we lack focus or we get diversified and have too many things. We don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. Or we think we're diversified and it's not actually diversified because it's in the same asset class. Another issue with retirement planning is people are automating their investing, but they're calling it savings. It's not a savings if you can't access it or if it's volatile, if there's penalties to get to it. And so we're automating the wrong things. So here's the deal. We have to question the concept of retirement. It came from a different time, from the industrial age, when people were literally working themselves to death on a terrible assembly lines, working 7 days a week, dying early. Retirement was something because life was pretty crappy. And if you have a type of career as an entrepreneur that you love, you can retire into your business, not necessarily from your business. If you can start to create financial independence along the way, having assets that create cash flow, you have freedom to do what you want to do, and you can create a vision that's so compelling that it's a life you never want to retire from. See, the notion of retirement, it's kind of this weird situation where it robs us from real wealth. I think wealth is a byproduct of a life well lived, or wealth is being present. And if we're like, well, one day, someday, we can finally enjoy our money if we just sacrifice enough along the way, miss out on memories that we never choose to have because we're trying to fund these plans, it actually has us chase a future at the expense of today. So a lot of people that are planning for this, they're just not present. They're not enjoying the journey. And there's really no control over the outcome of our income in retirement if it's just predicated upon retirement plans and investments that we don't control. So if taxes go up, our income goes down. If interest rates, lower, well, there's less fixed income that's coming in. If the economy struggles, well, that could be a problem. If there's high inflation, it starts to rob your purchasing power, confiscating the joy of your life in the future. So you're kind of in bondage to those things. Let me give you some fast money tips because money loves momentum and fast money wins. So rather than delay, plug financial leaks. If you watch any of my videos, I talk about the 4 I's to efficiency. The IRS, where you can stop tipping the government. Not overpay on interest when you learn the 3R methodology of restructure, renegotiate, and reallocate. Investments, find where there's hidden fees or where there's simply non-performing fees that don't add to the bottom line. There's a lot of people paying percentages where you can have a flat fee and pocket the difference, and that can make a huge difference over time. Or just insurance. There's a lot of duplicate coverages, improper structure. People lack multi-policy discounts, or they don't know how to use what's called an umbrella policy to get their liability coverage rather than their car and homeowners insurance. Therefore, spending too much money for inadequate coverage. It's really about focusing on your cash flow over accumulation. That's the key. So rather than chasing 10% because you've scrimped and saved and hope the market's going to save you, and you chase that 10% with the market and then you wait for 30 years, focus on financial independence. Then enjoy your life a little bit along the way. Take the trips that you've been delaying. Improve your quality of life. I kind of feel like there's a ream when it comes to retirement plans. I think retirement plans only exist, well, because people do crazy things like trading time for money or working a job they hate for 30 years, always putting away the money into these plans, budgeting, missing out on the experiences and adventure just so they can have some saved up to finally do what they love once they're too old to actually do it. Retirement's kind of like hating to cook, but loving food. So you spend a bunch of your time making a giant, delicious meal, and then when it's done, instead of eating it, you just die. Look, and that's what used to happen. People worked hard jobs and would literally work until they died. That's why retirement was invented. It was a different time, a time of brawn. As I mentioned before, assembly lines, building railroads, that's hard labor. Most people today don't labor. Typing on a Zoom meeting isn't labor. Working at Jamba Juice isn't labor. Labor isn't what we do. Recording a pod, that's not labor. We don't deserve to get Labor Day off. Hell, my dad was a coal miner. Now that's labor. Those people needed the day off to rest their black lungs and broken mining skeletons. Ladies, that's why having a baby's called labor, because it's hard-ass work. It kind of wrecks you, and you need a couple hours off after. Okay, I get it. That bad joke, little tone deaf. What do I know about labor? Well, I remember when my family went to Italy for the first time. I'd been dairy-free for 10 years, but my wife introduced me to this thing called Pecorino Toscano. She bought a whole wheel of cheese, and I have no self-control, so I ate the whole thing. Guess what? The next day, I gave birth to an 8-pound, 3-ounce shit. It hurt. There were tears, maybe a little blood. We had a ceremony. We named it. We flushed it down. But you know what? I was back in the game a couple hours later. See, nowadays, people in America work in mostly nicer environments, and they get to stay clean every day. Yet somehow, we're still trying to work towards retirement. So why? We can spend 90% of our time on social media instead of the current 70%? Honestly, what are you retiring from? How much work are we really doing now that we want 30 years of days off to finish our lives? Do you know the definition of retirement? It means to take out of service. Like something they do to an old cow behind the barn. Is that what you want? When they retire a player's jersey or a plane or a vending machine, it's not good news. It means it's not useful anymore. So what does that say about us after we retire? Hey, Ma, what should we do with Dad now that he's retired? We're not using him anymore. I guess we just put him in the spare room by that treadmill until he dies. All right, let's dive into and dispel the limitations of retirement planning. The first suggestion I have is don't automate your investing. Like if we're putting money into something and it's not working, why would we keep putting money in there? There's a lack of accountability. There's a lack of knowledge in that. And that ignorance is an ignorance tax that costs us money. So instead, automate your savings. Pay yourself first. You kind of set money aside, automatically sweep it off into a separate account. I call this either a peace of mind fund or wealth capture account. It could be at the same bank that you're at, checking, savings, money market. Every time you make a deposit in your personal account, a certain percentage goes into this, wealth capture account. Automate that. Get at least 6 months of savings. Some people say 3 to 6 months. That's a radically different amount of time, 3 months or 6 months. I think it's because they don't know how to help people save more money without destroying their life. But if you use those 4 I's I talked about, stop tipping the government, don't overpay on interest, just those 2 things alone, we studied in What Would the Rockefellers Do? It's a book that if you just go to Garrett Gunderson on Instagram and put WWRD, we'll hook you up with a PDF of it on me. And you can look at the study we did. We said, what if people could double the return in their retirement account over their lifetime? What would that amount to? Then we said, but what if on the other hand, we could just save them on taxes and on interest? And in the study, we found out people were 400% better off with something as guaranteed as saving interest and taxes than chasing a return that might actually put their money at risk. So don't just set it and forget it into some retirement plan. Set it aside and then intentionally and deliberately invest. Now, dollar cost average is one of the things people are taught in this, right? Do you really want to be average? What does that mean? Well, sometimes the market's up, you're buying less shares, but you're putting money in every month. Sometimes it's down, you're buying more shares. Sometimes it's flat, and it's kind of equal. The answer is always the same in the market. Oh, it's going up. You got to get in. Oh, it's going down. You got to buy. It's on sale. What about just getting your liquidity and savings and then investing in your skill set so you could add more value, be of more value, increase your value? You entrepreneurs out there, invest in your people so that you get more production. Invest in your processes and procedures so you have automation and systems that support everything that you're up to. Don't rob money from your business and starve it out just to fund some SEP IRA that you don't get to use till one day someday. See, one of the things is when we have high unemployment rates and there's distress, that's the time that you can actually get amazing employees. That's where one of the leading indicators of future economic growth. Distress creates opportunity. If we look at people that had a lot of cash in 2009 and 2010, they could buy things for dirt cheap that before were out of reach. Look, let me give an example. Back in the day, there was a recession. And let's talk about two very well-known, pretty popular companies, Burger King and McDonald's. They had two radically different philosophies during distress. Burger King said, it's a nuclear winter. We're going to hunker down. We're going to cut expenses, and we're just going to make it through. And they did. They made it through. McDonald's said, you know what? This is the time to build our real estate empire. There's going to be corners that we never had access to that we could buy those properties, and we could put franchises there. And what happened was McDonald's increased their market share of all fast food during that time, 53%. It's a different mindset. When there's distress and everybody's running, that's the time that the opportunities exist. But if your money's locked away in a retirement plan and you're watching it go down and it's starting to, sabotage your mindset and your feelings, like, I feel bad. I worked so hard for this money and now that's not working out. But don't worry, you're in it for the long haul. Do you want to be in it for the long haul if it's not working? Automate your savings and deliberately invest. All of us have tons of opportunity in our life. It's just that most people don't have the liquidity or money to capitalize on opportunity because they've tied it up one-dimensionally in a retirement plan. So start thinking about allocating intentionally. That's the first thing. The second is most of these plans defer tax. They don't necessarily save tax. So you're kind of disadvantaged from day one. What do I mean by that? If I put money into a retirement plan like $10,000, it looks like I have $10,000, but it's FBO for benefit of me. But I don't get to touch that till 59 and a half unless I have a major issue that allows me to get some of that money without the penalty, maybe buying a first home, or, there's a few exclusions there. There's things you could do to get substantially equal income from it, like a 72T, but you still have to lock up your principal. But the reality is I'm deferring those taxes in the future. And if I want to get that money before 59 and a half, I'm at a 10% disadvantage. So if I put $10,000 in, I want it back the next day. Well, $3,000 of that was really the government's if I'm at a 30% tax bracket. Now it's 40% the government because of the penalty. So you're at a disadvantage from day one. A lot of people are like, oh, but there's uninterrupted compounding. Well, if taxes remain the same 10 years from now as they are today, it doesn't matter whether you put your money after tax in a Roth IRA, have it grown, you can access that money tax-free, or that it goes in pre-tax and it goes into a traditional IRA or SEP IRA or something like that, and then we defer it for 10 years. When we go to pull the money out, we owe 30% still. So the net is the same. If that money were to grow to $500,000 in one account over 30 years or $700,000 in the other, by the time we take out the $700,000, the 30% tax takes us down to $500,000 because the government share compounds as well. So it's this kind of misnomer and myth. I've got other videos and pods that share this and show this very specifically. You can go and view to discover this in showing the math behind it. Now, another reason tax deferral can be problematic is because they say, well, you'll be in a lower tax bracket in the future. Well, how's that going to happen? Either one, you're planning for failure, you're going to have less money in the future. That's not good. I guess the government could lower the tax rates, and that could theoretically happen, although they're $36 trillion in debt. You could have more write-offs, but if you sold your business, that's one of the biggest write-offs that you could possibly have. And other write-offs like paying your kids before they're 18 and getting up to $13,000 tax deductible to you, tax-free to them, that's gone, unless you're Mick Jagger, and you got a kid when you're in your 80s that just came about. So how are you going to be in a lower tax bracket? Just inflation alone pushes our tax rates up because we have to have more money to buy the same number of things today, right? We have to have more money in the future to buy the same number of things we have today because of inflation. Maybe our dollar's worth half of that 10 years from now. If that's the case, you get pushed in a higher tax rate simply because you have more money, but it doesn't get you more purchasing power because of inflation. A big one for me is I just have a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity, kind of the dilemma. When my wife and I, first were married, we lived in a small apartment. Now we live in a really nice house. We have this beautiful cabin that I'm in and filming this podcast, and we go on much nicer trips than we used to. So it's hard to kind of go back because that luxury just starts to feel like, oh man, I don't want to go back. I don't want to, I don't want to sit and coach. I'm too tall. I can't write. I'm a T-Rex in there. I like having first class, and whatever that is for you, there might be certain things you enjoy that you wouldn't want to give back or give up. So got to ask yourself again, how are you been in a lower tax bracket in the future? Less money, government lowers taxes, more write-offs, and just consider when you put money in that plan, there's a penalty. So the money is actually stuck in the plan, and the tax savings is not in your pocket. It's in the plan. So yes, you paid less tax this year because you didn't actually receive that income. You deferred that income into a plan that you're going to take at a later date, and that's filled with risk. So the third issue here is something called premature diversification. Premature diversification is we diversify into things that aren't as productive. There's too much opportunity cost. So I'm going to spread myself thin in a bunch of mutual funds before hiring the right employee, buying the right equipment, developing the right skill sets. I think that, my first year out of school, I spent more my first year on my education than I did all 4 years of college because I want to learn about this financial game. I want to learn about business. And every year since, just this year, I invested like $200,000 in my education for one of the things that I did. That's more than I spent, times whatever with college. So it's not like learning is a one-time game. And if we can exponentially increase our skill sets that matter, that add more value, that serve more people, that create deeper impact, money follows value. Money chases value. So don't become less valuable because you're trying to build this net worth in an account that isn't going to pay off till far into the future. So if we starve our business to fund our retirement, is that really a good idea? Or if we slow our skills to fund retirement, is that a good idea? The fourth issue here is bad sequencing. See, some people are so set on funding these plans, they have really high interest rate loans, 15% credit cards, 20% credit cards. They're paying interest on that, or they're putting money in a plan that, if the market did 6, 7, maybe 10% on the high end, you're feeling really great. That's less than what you're paying in interest. And that's a guaranteed savings if you pay off that interest rate. Again, not investing in yourself could be a bad sequencing, or not having that 6 months liquidity that helps you give staying power, or an opportunity fund when the right opportunities arise. So we have to consider these things, right? And if we're not building the right infrastructure to live our best life, if we're not enjoying life along the way, if we're draining our energy to fund these plans, you are your greatest asset, not a stock, bond, piece of real estate, or retirement plan. It's you. If you're not investing in yourself and growing your energy and feeling better about life and creating more control over the outcome of your income, then we get relegated to the situation where we're like, man, this retirement plan may or may not work. I sure hope so. And we find out that far too many of them are underfunded anyway. So yeah, well, maybe I need to start early and put more money in it. Well, maybe, but maybe the answer is you got to learn how to make more money first and then keep more of the money you make by plugging financial leaks, and then learn how to be a better investor versus setting it into things you know nothing about. See, if you grow yourself, you can grow your assets. But grow yourself first. Don't neglect yourself just to scrimp, save, sacrifice, and budget your life away. So the fifth issue here, and this is a big one. So I'm going to go and draw this. If we had someone saying, oh, I want to have $1 million in my retirement plan, and I've got 20 years to do it, then we could play around with the interest rate. Well, if you're only earning 5% versus 10%, it's going to require a much larger number here to go into the plan. And if you've only got 20 years versus 30 years, well, it's going to be an increased number that you have to put into the plan. So this is part of the issue that happens for people, is because they're like, I don't have enough money to get to that million. I'm just going to take more risk, but that risk could put their entire capital at jeopardy. They're in too aggressive with funds. I remember this was way back in the day, but in the year 2001, I read this article. A vice president for Mass Mutual Retirement Services retired in the year 1999. He put most of his money in aggressive mutual funds and $100,000 into a small business he wanted to start. And that was in 1999. The market had been so strong. It had been a bull market for that decade. And then in 2001, he was driving limos to make ends meet because his aggressive funds tanked in 2000 and 2001. He lost over half of it in just 2 years. and he didn't do a good job running his business. And so now he was back into a bad situation. But later in life, and are you really going to go back getting a retirement planning job if you didn't do a good job planning retirement? So needs-based is like, how much can I afford is not a good question, because then we can't control what that interest rate is because we don't control the markets. And, it's like whatever, if it's a diversified mutual fund, we kind of get what it gets. It's not like people are amazing at picking those things out, and one is so superior to others in long periods of time. They kind of regress to the mean, meaning that most index funds after 20 years have outperformed 9 out of 10 managed mutual funds, and you're paying a bunch of fees for those things. So what's the market actually going to do versus what you think it might do could be two different things. So this becomes very fragmented instead of focused on doing the very best you can with every dollar and having everything work in harmony and coordinated. Here's an example of coordination. If I have enough money in savings, I can raise my deductibles on my car and homeowners insurance because I can afford to pay those claims. And if I don't have to make small claims, I keep my rates down. If I have a really good attorney that works with my accountant, sets up the right corporation, how I pay myself from that lowers my tax bill, that's more money in my pocket. So all of a sudden, when we have everything work together, and then I say, when I'm going to invest, I want everything to do the best it can. I'm going to focus more on velocity than accumulation. Velocity is, can I create cash flow with that asset? That cash flow replaces my income. Then all my active income can start to build more assets. And the more assets I build, the more kicking off cash flow, the more powerful my portfolio becomes versus just taking 10% and trying to earn 10%. So if the market underperforms, how do you know you can even enjoy this money in the future? People that retired in the year 2022 had a pretty tough situation. We had really low interest rates. So if they were in bonds and interest rates rose, which they did in 2023, the value of their bonds went down. And in 2022, their bonds might get a couple percent. So they have $1 million. They're getting $20,000, $30,000 of income off of that. That's not very much. And if it was all deferred tax, that's taxable in addition to that. So they might be a millionaire on paper, but living like a pauper. I know I'm getting excited, and I'm not yelling at you. I'm passionate about this kind of stuff, and I want to share it because I want people to have compassion for themselves and empathy, or I don't even know if I'm using the right word there, about what life's going to be like in the future. And if we have faulty planning and faulty frameworks, we put undue pressure on ourselves when we have less capacity or ability to do something about it if we are just thinking about retirement planning. So let's think about it. If we went back and interviewed people in 1980, if you're were around that time and young, what did you think was a good amount of money to have in retirement? If you're younger, go ask someone older, what did they think was a good amount to have? 250 grand, 500, maybe $1 million if they thought big. That's not that much money today because inflation decimated the dollar. Let's look at a couple things, right? Let's look at some 1980 to 2023 prices. A dozen eggs, 91 cents in 1980. In 2023, the average was $3. What about ground beef? $1.39 in 1980, $5.30 in 2023. A new car, $7,200 in 1980, $48,000 in 2023. Average house price, $68,700, $416,100. And that really depends on where you live, especially today. Here's the only good news. Movie ticket was $269. Today it's $9.16, but there's not a lot of movies, and we have plenty of streaming services. So these 2023 prices are approximate averages, and look, they can definitely vary based upon location and brand, and the comparison I'm giving you just kind of shows you how the prices have increased over time. So here's the sixth issue. Retirement planning kind of promotes a budgeting mindset. Budgeting is usually focused more on reduction, which is a finite game, instead of production. If we're always thinking about what we could cut out and eliminate, what we could reduce and where we could spend less, and we see expenses as something negative, that gets us stuck in scrimping and saving and delaying and deferring, and we kind of become those misers. If you read the book, The Millionaire Next Door, yeah, you too can be a broke, miserable millionaire that has a lot of money but doesn't get to enjoy it if you never spend it. But what good is money if we don't get to utilize it? What if you have a plan like the Rockefeller method? And I recommend WWRD on Instagram, Garrett B. Gunderson. I'll hook you up because the Rockefeller method shows you how you could spend your money and then replenish it from generation to generation. So you're not just letting it sit there stagnant, only living off the interest subject to these changes. So look, let me just test you here for a second. When you hear the word expense, what do you think? How do you feel? Just give you kind of like that negative, like guttural feeling. Most people think of expenses as bad, right? Like I got to eliminate expenses. That's a budgetary mindset. I got to save more money. I got to put more money away. I got to not do the things I want to do. Now, obviously, we don't want to be reckless and spend more than we have. But your income is another person's expense. And if our whole goal in the world is to reduce expenses, we reduce exchange, and it's exchange that creates wealth. That's what velocity is. The more times dollars exchange hands. Like if I give you $1 today, you get to take and use that dollar again. How many times does that dollar circulate in the economy is the velocity? Even if there's a finite amount of money, we can have more output just by being more efficient, by adding more value, by increasing exchange. And so that's absolutely key. I remember when it was like 2008 and there was like the recession was hitting and people were like, just don't go out to eat. Okay, so just stop exchanging, start reducing expenses, start buying into fear. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the other thing is, if we get that budgetary mindset, especially as business owners, we're going to slow down our business. IBM did this study on A-teamers, and they showed that they were 5,200% higher output, more productive. Now, they might cost 10, 20, 30% more to get, but they're producing so much more. I remember I watched the Lost tapes on Netflix. It was this interview with Steve Jobs after he died. They'd only taken a clip from it for some other documentary, but then they showed the whole thing. And he said one of the most strategic advantages he had as a business owner is the difference between an A-team and a B-teamer was radically different. He said the difference between the best sounding, sound system in the world versus the second best was hard for the untrained ear to even detect. But the price could be pretty substantial. He said it wasn't that substantial to get A-teamers, but they produced so much more. He said they built a Macintosh on a handful of people. They could feed them with a pizza. Most people thought it took hundreds of people. So if we're in budgetary and we're not thinking about output and production and increased value, then we might miss out on things that allow us to increase our value, to enjoy our life more along the way, to be more productive, to create more wealth. Yes, you can scrimp your way to millions of dollars, but that's probably costing you tens of millions of production. Part of it's just understanding price and cost and value. These are the three measures of worth. Price is what we pay. Everybody knows that, and that's why we see in retail, they're always saying, half price and 40% off and get, Black Friday and all this kind of stuff to get people to think they're saving money. But you have something with a low price and a high cost. I once flew I didn't fly Spirit Airlines, close, Frontier Airlines. And I was middle seat. It was the only flight I could get where I needed to get on time. And I remember I couldn't do any work. I couldn't recline my seat. I was just so uncomfortable. And they're like, hey, if you're in the premium seats that recline, sit those up. I was like, oh, I bought too late. But I was like, man, that's a low price, but a super high cost. Imagine if an airline said, hey, we're just not going to train our people or get good mechanics. We're going to have the cheapest airline. Are you getting on that flight? A wing falls off. You're like, oh, shit, that was worth the extra price, right? Sometimes a higher price can be a lower cost. An amazing attorney, a great accountant, the right financial team, they might have a higher price but lower cost because they save you more in tax, more in interest. They get you financially organized. You don't get devastated by financial mistakes or financial surprises because you're prepared, because you've been stress tested and there's things that are there for you. So don't just look at price, look at the economics of it. That's the cost. But the third factor is value. Your overall feeling of satisfaction, enjoyment, fulfillment. When people are financially free, they put value first. They definitely consider the cost. And price is a consideration, just not the consideration. So financial freedom is really a state of being or a state of mind. It's a perspective. That perspective, money is no longer the primary reason or excuse you would do or not do something. It's a consideration, just not the consideration. If you find two vehicles you love the same, one's 50 grand, the other one's 40 grand, buy the one that's 40 grand, right? If you value it the same, and the economic cost will be less by having a lower price if they both get similar gas mileage and stuff like that you might consider. But this is key. All right, the seventh issue, I just see a lot of people out there saying, delay your Social Security payment. Well, what's the opportunity cost? What could you do with that money over 8 years, even though it's a smaller amount, versus waiting until you're 70? And is Social Security going to be around if you're younger? I'm not counting on it. I'm creating my own financial independence so that I can do what I want to do. I've been financially independent in my life multiple times. I've not been financially independent. When I am financially independent, I tend to have a expanded vision. I can swing for the fences because my wife knows if I have a crazy idea like filming a comedy special, that we're still eating the same food. Our kids go in the same school. We drive the same cars. Like, we're not sacrificing our lifestyle because we're financially independent. And sometimes launching a book or building a business can take longer, and it has an insatiable appetite, maybe takes more money than we think, but financial independence can allow for that track for people. So don't just delay. Look at the opportunity cost and consider what the value of that money is over time. Now, the eighth thing is a lack of distribution diversification. This is kind of like an exit strategy. See, we know about compounding interest in investing. It goes up. But look up the 4% rule. The 4% rule says if you retire with a retirement plan and it's variable, maybe you've got some stocks, some bonds, and so stocks you help it grow, bonds kind of create the income. The problem is if you have a down year, you disinvest because you take the money out to live on and it takes out from the principal. So even if the market recovers or comes back, you have less money, and so you're running the risk of running out of money by taking more than 4%. But if you have distribution diversification, you can actually move the 4% to 6.25% as long as you have another account that gives you 2 years where you don't have to take from a variable account. Like I have a whole bunch of whole life insurance. I can use that cash value because once the dividend's paid, it's guaranteed. I can access it at any time. I can take it as a withdrawal or I can take it as a loan. It's up to me. But ultimately, it gives me this distribution diversification that allows me to have more income in the future. Look at this. I mean, this is a simple category on this. If you have $100,000 and you lose 10%, you're down to $90,000. Now, if the market gains 10% the next year, you're only back to $99,000 because it's 10% of a lower amount. And that's assuming there's no fees associated with that. So we have to consider that with disinvesting, right? All right. Compound interest, we've heard it's a miracle. We've heard it's so great. And yeah, I guess if your account's always going up and you don't have down years and you can wait for 30 years, it takes quite a while for that to work out. But the reality is there's also compounding costs. The simplest example is $100,000. If you invest that and you earn 10%, it grows to $1.74 million, assuming no taxes, no fees. But if there's fees and you're at 9.2% return versus 10, it only grows to $1.4 million. Why? Because there's a compound cost on that less than 1%. Part of the problem I have with compound interest is it's a lack of accountability. It's a lack of cash flow along the way, how one-dimensional it is, how slow it is. 1% or less than 1% is such a huge difference. Imagine if you're selling somewhere and you're 1 degree off. You end up in a different hemisphere eventually. All right, and the final piece, I've kind of mentioned it a couple times now. It's too one-dimensional to focus only on retirement planning. You've got car insurance, homeowners, liability, disability, medical, life insurance. You've got tax planning. You've got estate and legacy planning and asset protection. You've got corporate structure. You've got a bunch of different factors like insurance, and all those things make a difference in your finances. And if you're thinking, well, I'm just saving money in retirement plan, you're neglecting these other things. Not that people always do that, but often people have far too much reliance on a retirement plan and not enough on these other factors. So you want to have, for example, tax diversification. If you have a tax deferred account and taxes go up, it's nice if you have another account like my cash value that I can get without tax. Also what I mentioned before, the distribution diversification. So let me recap this. Retirement planning is often it's just one-dimensional. There's compounded costs with compound interest. There's not enough distribution diversification, which leads to potential disinvesting, which could kill the account. People are taught to delay Social Security. They have opportunity cost on what they could have done with that money. A budgeting mindset was about cutting back and reducing and seeing expenses as bad to be eliminated and not thinking about productive expenses. It's needs-based instead of maximization. Too fragmented. 529 plan here, 401k there. Instead of like, what if I just maximize my wealth overall? What's my investor DNA? Where am I the best investor? We automate the wrong things like investing instead of saving. Sometimes we have the wrong sequencing or we have premature diversification because we pull good money from a business and rob that business of productivity by funding a retirement account. So let me also recap this. Maybe it's time to reconsider retirement. What if it's financial independence and doing more of what we enjoy? I know there's a lot of jobs out there that are absolutely horrendous. They're terrible. People chose them for benefits or they were in a stuck place and they're not enjoying it. So retirement might seem like a dream, but for most people, it's a ream because they don't enjoy the journey. They're stuck in one day, someday. They lack happiness and fulfillment. Again, they're not in control of the outcome of their income. It's the market that is quite often. And so if taxes change or interest rates change or inflation's high, that starts to rob them of their enjoyment, of their peace of mind, of their prosperity. So let's go to this section. What would money Jesus do? Look, I've spoken at events where people introduce me as money Jesus, and that's flattering. But to be fair, I don't really look like Jesus. I look like if I pulled my hair back and spelled my name differently, I could be Barista Jesus, right? So instead, leverage the Rockefeller method. This allows you to create better savings accounts and better accounts than bonds in any 30-year period of time because you lock in your gains. You don't have to pay taxes on those gains. You get additional benefits, so you can eliminate term insurance because you have something that's permanent. And it becomes a replacement for your fixed income portfolio. It's just a different asset allocation. You can learn all about that and what would the Rockefellers do. Garrett B. Gunderson on Instagram. Follow for some daily doses of prosperity, some tips, some tactics, and grab this book. It's on me. Now, focus on financial independence instead of retirement. Create that in 10 years or less. Don't wait for 30 years and hope that, compound interest will kick in. Instead of budgeting, use mindful cash management. Pay yourself first, and then identify. Do you have destructive expenses that should be eliminated because they lead to debt? Pay cash for your lifestyle expenses. Address your protective expenses, because if you don't, you'll have a financial surprise, confiscate your wealth. And then increase productive expenses. When you put in $1, more than $1 comes out of cash flow, or it increases your ability to produce value and add more value in the world. And then instead of speculating with your investing, choose investor DNA. Investor DNA, that's your values, which is your script for how to operate and what you find important. It's your competencies, where you've got abilities and insights and mental capital. And then ultimately, what drives you? Where are you willing to pay interest and study and learn? If we abdicate responsibility and hope someone's going to take care of our money, nobody's going to care more about your money than you do. Utilize a team, don't rely on one. And focus more on three-dimensional investing. Three-dimensional investments are like businesses. They can grow in equity, cash flow, and you can feel fulfillment with the work that you do. Focus on three-dimensional investing like real estate. It could cash flow, it could grow in value, and it can create tax advantages. Instead of being one-dimensional and relegated to just what the market's doing and you have no control over it, take back control of your finances and your life.